An American story for overcoming limitations. What do you feel limited by? More than just feel, what are you limited by? We all are limited, whether it be physically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, or whatever else. Some might think they have no limits, but we all live in reality and we know that isn't the case. The challenge we face is not in whether or not we have limits. The challenge we face as Americans is, how do I let those limitations affect me? Do you let your limitations consume you and control you? Are your limitations the reason for neglecting good actions that your limitations would not necessarily prevent? I personally have great limitations in all arenas. Physically, I face a chronic illness daily that's severely debilitating. The thoughts come to mind often. I have become so useless. Those thoughts are always close at hand and would easily consume me. I have been strengthened by this American story from the Revolutionary War of an unsung hero whose greatest victory may not be in battle, but in the model he set for the American spirit of overcoming limitations for the good of the nation. The first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired in 1975. The rumblings of 13 colonies that wanted independence were heard all over for decades. Now it's 170 years after the founding of the 13 colonies. The desire for independence from Great Britain was at a fever pitch. This fever pitch drew the interest of a young Nathaniel Greene, a bright but humble man. July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed, severing all ties between the 13 colonies and Great Britain. However, this was not the end of the war. The king did not soon hand over his efforts to expand his dominion into the new land. The British troops did not, all of a sudden, wave the white flag and sail back to their homeland. The Declaration of Independence was a declaration of war for Great Britain to relent and to recognize the new American nation. The war for American independence raged on for another 7 years, costing many lives, but filling American history with a litany of heroes, exemplifying the American spirit of virtue, bravery, determination, and love of national freedom and independence. One such hero is General Nathaniel Greene. You probably don't remember him. It's okay. He didn't seem to be a man concerning himself with the thought that you should. He is easily forgotten and seems to be the kind of humble enough to be content to have it that way. And in a day where most are out to make a name for themselves, it was not always so among our American heroes. He arose through the ranks quickly to become General Washington's most trusted Major General, one of the greatest number 2 men in our nation's history. Isn't it often so true that every great leader usually has a great number 2? None succeed alone. General Greene's rise through the ranks is rather shocking when you know his limitations. Greene was raised in a Quaker family. The religious convictions he was raised with were pacifist. Pacifists generally avoid violence and military service, believing nonviolent resolutions will be sufficient. And this is the background of Greene's life. He must have been torn between how he was raised and the challenges of Great Britain's occupation and tyranny, and what he believed could be a new great nation, a free nation. He concluded that violence was necessary in order to prevent greater violence, and he lived by his conviction regardless of the limitations of his past. Now, on the one hand, he could have honored his family and religious heritage and abstained from military service. On the other hand, he could leave his family's persuasions, living by his own convictions, that independence was worth fighting for and that tyranny was a greater violence. And now enter the story personally with me. Have you had to, with moral courage, stand against your upbringing at the risk of losing your family or a minimum your family's support for the good of others? Is there some way in which you need to have moral courage now that embodies the American spirit in the building up of our nation amongst your locality and in your own community? How many of us have been left by liberal friends and family just for being an American patriot today? It's not an easy limitation to overcome. Few possess the moral courage, unless on the internet, to overcome past beliefs and to live by convictions that led to the greater good. Many are content to stay where they are, even when duty calls for higher. For General Greene, this was no issue, and it wasn't even his only limitation. He was also very physically limited. He had asthma, making it difficult for him to breathe at times, and he walked with a limp from a childhood affliction. Technically, this qualified him for military service. Yet he didn't say to himself, "Oh, okay, I guess I'll just go back home then." He strengthened his military strategy, prowess, and insight. He led the early militias in Rhode Island under General Washington in the Continental Army. Washington quickly recognized him because he stood out amongst the rest as a leader and appointed him as his most trusted general. Eventually, General Greene's military strategy overcame British troops across the American South. His strategy reflected his character and the humility that made him one of the greatest number 2 men in history. Stop and think for a moment. I wonder how much pain he was in from his limp, hiking through the mountainous regions of South Carolina, Virginia, and northern Georgia. There was no drone attacks. There were no vehicle convoys. There were no car rides for military leaders. Maybe a horse, maybe not later in the war. I wonder how often he was short of breath from asthma. It really is truly remarkable. My sense is that he was such a man as did not bother himself too much with those limitations day in and day out, even in the midst of war. General Greene had a mission bigger than himself, and he would not be hindered. His military strategy was often slow, a war of attrition. He knew full well that not all victories have immediate glory. Who would afford the cost to contractors supporting the American armies? General Greene put all of the properties that he and all of the things that he owned up as collateral, incurring debts personally to himself to ensure the care of his men and the victory in the war. His strategy decimated British troops and largely led to the end of the Revolutionary War officially in 1983. Once victory was won, he had to sell everything he owned to cover the debts he personally incurred in the war effort, having won the victory and nothing to show for it himself. How much have we lost these humble virtues in modern America? See, to be an American and to believe we have American heroes means there is a responsibility to become like them. How else will freedom endure beyond political cycles? What opportunities are in front of you to sacrifice for the good of others? Are you a leader who needs to show more interest in the needs of those under you? Are you a number 2 who is really just fighting for the top spot instead of being a great number 2? It is in the American spirit from the early days to give everything for your fellow man. Is it now? Or is it just about me and mine? How much different would modern America be if instant gratification and instant glory gave way to Greene's military strategy, knowing full well that anything built to last doesn't always mean immediate glory? It means grit, determination, sacrifice, struggle, then success. Beyond that, be encouraged by Greene's example of overcoming limitations. He wasn't cured of asthma. His limp was never fixed. He couldn't change his pacifist upbringing. Overcoming limitations did not mean all of his limitations were fixed, my friends. Overcoming limitations meant that they didn't keep him from spending himself to become all that he could become in spite of those very limitations. May this help you to see your limitations through General Greene's eyes, because your nation needs you again, now more than ever, in order to preserve enduring freedom. You are a participant in ensuring that freedom is not the function of political cycles, but a lasting virtue of our great nation and a virtue abroad. Let no limitation hinder you, dear patriot. Think about it. Thank you for listening. As always, this content is brought to you by the Old Glory Coin Token. If you want to support our effort to preserve freedom for the next generation, please consider holding the Old Glory Coin Token and sending these messages along to people you know who want to do the same.